Imagine sitting in a hair salon. You are just having a completely normal afternoon, getting a trim.
Right. Just a typical weekend chore.
Exactly. And the woman cutting your hair is, she's chatting with you, smiling, asking about your day. She has a driver's license in her wallet. She has a bank account.
A lease in her name, too, probably.
Yeah, an apartment lease. She pays taxes. I mean, on paper, she is a completely functioning member of society. But according to the United States government, she doesn't actually exist. She is a ghost.
Which is just, I mean, it's an incredible concept.
It's wild. For 22 years, this woman was just an absolute master at erasing herself. But, and this is what we are getting into today, what happens when a ghost commits a brutal physical murder.
Right.
And suddenly she realizes that, well, you might be able to fake a piece of plastic at the DMV, but you cannot delete biology. You cannot delete DNA.
No, you really can't. And it creates this fascinating and terrifying collision of two entirely different worlds.
Yeah, totally.
Because you have an individual who has basically perfected the art of analog invisibility. I mean, she knows how to manipulate paper records, how to exploit bureaucracy, how to literally vanish into thin air. But then she is suddenly forced into the messy, inescapable, and highly permanent reality of a modern crime scene.
And that collision is exactly what we are going to explore today. So this deep dive is a full forensic and behavioral reconstruction of the 2018 disappearance of Joleen Cummings.
A really tragic case.
It really is. And we'll get into the truly bizarre unmasking of her killer, Kimberly Kessler. So our mission here today is twofold. First, we need to understand the mechanics of how Kessler maintained this incredibly elaborate evasion apparatus for over 2 decades. Like, how do you actually hide in plain sight for that long without tripping a single wire?
It takes a very specific kind of dedication.
Absolutely. And second, we are going to look at how investigators use this, like a combination of microscopic physical evidence and digital forensics to secure a notoriously difficult nobody murder conviction.
Yeah, and to give you a sense of the foundation we are building this on, our analysis today is drawn from a pretty dense stack of comprehensive sources.
Tons of material for this one.
Oh yeah, we are looking at detailed forensic analysis reports, missing persons data, pulled directly from NAMIUS.
And for anyone who might not be familiar with that, what is NAMIUS?
Right, so NAMIUS is the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. It's basically a critical government database used to track these exact kinds of vanishing acts. We are also pulling from some incredibly thorough, boots-on-the-ground investigative journalism from News4JAX, CBS, and the Butler Eagle.
We have the timelines, the courtroom documents, all the digital footprints. I mean, the core tension of this entire story is that exact collision you mentioned earlier, right? The master of the offline disguise running headfirst into the cold, hard data of modern investigative science.
That's exactly it.
So let's just go back to where this nightmare actually started, down in a small coastal town on a weekend that, frankly, was supposed to be about family.
Yeah, to really understand the gravity of this case, we have to start with the victim. Joleen Cummings was 34 years old. She was a mother of 3 young children, and she worked as a hairstylist at Tangle's Hair Salon in Fernandina Beach, Florida.
Right.
And by all accounts, she was just a deeply devoted mother, highly integrated into her family's life, and a super reliable presence at her job.
And the timing of her disappearance is just unimaginably cruel, I think. It was Mother's Day weekend, right, in May of 2018.
May 2018.
Specifically Sunday, May 13th. And it was this convergence of 2 major events. It was Mother's Day, and it was also Joleen's 34th birthday.
Wow.
I know. So this is a weekend that is entirely anchored around her.
And the sourcing notes that her mother, Ann Johnson, had just spoken to Joleen about this angel figurine that Ann had left at Joleen's workstation at the salon.
Oh, that's right. They were really close.
Very close. Joleen was actively making plans to create a Mother's Day present with her own kids to give to Ann. I mean, these are not the behaviors of someone planning to walk away from their life, you know?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
These are the behaviors of someone who is really looking forward to Sunday.
But she never makes it to Sunday. The timeline starts to fracture on Saturday, May 12th. Joleen works her normal shift at Tangle's Hair Salon. And when she leaves that day, that is the very last time anyone sees her alive. The following day, Mother's Day, the plan is for Joleen to pick up her 3 children from her ex-husband, Jason Cummings. He lived in a nearby town called Hilliard.
Right.
Jason actually later testified that he waited for about an hour. He kept calling her phone, kept waiting for her beige 2006 Ford Expedition to pull into the driveway. But she never shows up.
And in missing persons cases, investigators look really heavily at victimology and behavioral baselines.
What do you mean by behavioral baselines?
Well, it's basically the established pattern of how a person normally lives their life.
Yeah.
So for a mother of three to simply vanish on Mother's Day, which is also her birthday, without contacting her children or her own mother, it completely shatters that behavioral baseline.
Yeah, it's an immediate red flag.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ann Johnson knew instantly that this was a crisis. Joleen wouldn't ignore her birthday. She certainly wouldn't just abandon her children.
So on Monday, May 14th, Ann Johnson officially reports her daughter missing to the Nassau County Sheriff's Office. But what is so chilling about this specific timeline is that the most critical clues had actually already been captured on tape before the police even knew Joleen was missing.
Right, the surveillance footage.
Yeah.
When investigators start working backward from the exact moment she was reported missing, they uncover this security video from a Yulee Home Depot parking lot.
And the timestamp on this is crucial.
Right, very crucial. It is May 13th at 1:17 a.m., so we're just a little over an hour into Mother's Day. And the video clearly shows Joleen's beige Ford Expedition pulling into this dark, empty lot.
But the person who opens the driver's side door and steps out into the parking lot is not Joleen. It is her coworker from the hair salon, a woman the local community just knew as Jennifer Seibert.
Yeah, and the sequence of events that unfolds immediately after she abandons Jolene's vehicle is, it's one of the most bizarre displays of post-defense behavior you can find in modern criminal psychology.
I really struggle with this next part, honestly, because it almost feels like a dark comedy. But obviously, the stakes are life and death.
Right.
So this woman, Seibert, she walks away from the abandoned SUV at the Home Depot and goes over to a nearby Gate gas station. She goes inside, asks the attendant to call her a cab. When the cab finally arrives, she gets in, and the ride she takes is only half a mile long.
Half a mile.
Let me just repeat that for everyone listening, because it's nuts. She calls a cab in the middle of the night to drive her half a mile. But before they even move, she insists on prepaying $20 on a credit card for this tiny, tiny trip.
And the conversation she initiates with the cab driver during that half mile is highly revealing. The driver, understandably confused by this extremely short distance, asks her why her friends or associates couldn't just give her a ride down the road.
Yeah, logical question.
Exactly. And her response, she tells him that her associates couldn't drive her because they, quote, didn't have gas.
Which the driver immediately noted was just completely absurd. If you have a credit card and you are willing to prepay $20 for a 2-minute cab ride, you could have just bought your friends $20 worth of gas while you were standing at the gas station.
Right. It makes absolutely zero logical sense.
None. But she doesn't stop there. She spends the rest of this extremely short ride aggressively grilling the cab driver about his religion.
Yeah.
She is asking him point blank if he is a born-again Christian and if he has received Jesus Christ as his savior.
And the driver actually recounted this entire exchange for investigators later. He noted that he told her he hadn't been to church in a while, and the whole interaction just left him deeply unsettled. He knew something was fundamentally wrong with this passenger.
Okay, I have to ask you to unpack this because I look at this cab ride and I just can't figure out the underlying strategy.
Well, there might not be one.
See, part of me thinks this religious probing was a deliberate Machiavellian move to leave a weird, highly specific impression and muddy the timeline. Like, oh, he won't remember a murderer, he'll just remember a crazy religious lady.
Right, a distraction.
Yeah, but then the excuse about not having gas is so incredibly stupid and easily disprovable that it feels like her brain was just short-circuiting. Which is it? Is this calculated distraction or total psychological unraveling?
It is an excellent question, and it really speaks to a concept in behavioral analysis known as cognitive load.
Okay, what is that?
Well, disposing of a victim's vehicle and managing the logistics of a murder requires immense, exhausting focus. The adrenaline is surging, the nervous system is completely in overdrive. So when an offender is carrying that massive cognitive load, they often lack the bandwidth to formulate complex, believable lies on the spot. The excuse about the gas was likely just a clumsy, impulsive fabrication because her brain simply couldn't process a better lie in that exact second. It was a cognitive misfire.
That makes perfect sense. It's like trying to do complex calculus while driving a car on ice. You just blurt out the first thing that comes to mind, even if it contradicts the fact that you're sitting at a literal gas station.
Exactly.
But what about the sudden intense focus on whether the driver was a born-again Christian?
So the religious questioning operates on a slightly different psychological track. Directly following a mortal sin of violent homicide offenders sometimes experience a sudden, overwhelming preoccupation with morality, salvation, or judgment.
Really? Like a guilty conscience bubbling up.
Yeah, it can be a leakage of internal guilt or even panic. Alternatively, if we look at how methodical she was in other areas of her life, it might have been an impulsive attempt to project an aura of
Oh,
innocence.
I see.
She desperately wants the driver to perceive her as a harmless, pious, born-again Christian, rather than, a predator who just abandoned a dead woman's car.
Hmm.
She's trying to construct this temporary shield of morality.
So she is trying to play a character, but the mask is slipping because she is under too much pressure. And that pressure only intensifies. While Seibert is taking this bizarre cab ride, the sun comes up, Mother's Day passes, and by Monday, the police are actively investigating.
Because Joleen has been reported missing.
Exactly. And deputies naturally visit her workplace, Tangle's hair salon, to ask some standard questions. And when Jennifer Seibert realizes law enforcement is poking around her workplace, her reaction is just immediate and extreme.
Yeah, she doesn't stick around to express concern for her missing coworker. She doesn't offer to help distribute flyers, nothing like that.
No.
She abruptly calls the salon owner, quits her job on the spot, and flees Nassau County entirely.
It is the ultimate guilty mind behavior, but her escape attempt is remarkably short-lived. Just 2 days later, on May 16th, investigators track her down.
They found her sleeping, right?
Yeah, they find her sleeping inside her black Kia Soul at an interstate rest stop in neighboring St. Johns County. They arrest her right there in the parking lot on a charge of grand theft auto, specifically for taking Joleen's Ford Expedition.
And this arrest, it really serves as the major pivot point of the entire narrative. Because when the St. Johns County deputies and the Nassau County investigators bring Jennifer Seibert into the interrogation room, they are operating under a standard assumption.
They think they have their suspect.
Right. They believe they have apprehended a local Florida hairstylist who stole her coworker's car and likely knows where the missing mother is.
But as they sit across the table from her, that assumption completely disintegrates. The arrest of Jennifer Seibert wasn't the conclusion of a missing persons case.
Far from it.
It was the horrifying realization that the woman sitting in their custody, the woman who had been cutting hair and chatting with locals for years, legally did not exist.
Her entire life was a fabrication. And as investigators started pulling at the threads of her identity, they uncovered an evasion apparatus that most law enforcement professionals will never see in their entire careers.
The unmasking of this woman is staggering. Investigators run fingerprints, they coordinate with federal agencies, and the identity of Jennifer Seibert just evaporates. The woman in custody was actually named Kimberly Kessler.
From Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, she was originally from Butler County, Pennsylvania, and she had been living completely off the grid, on the run, since at least 1996.
Wow.
Think about that time frame. 1996 to 2018. 22 years as a phantom. Her own mother, Connie Kessler, had formally reported her missing back in 2012, and her family hadn't laid eyes on her since 2004.
The sheer scale and operational discipline of her deception just cannot be overstated. We are not talking about someone who occasionally used a fake name to dodge a bar tab,
Right, this wasn't a fake ID for a college kid.
Exactly. We are talking about a systemic, highly organized erasure of identity. Sheriff Bill Leeper and federal investigators ultimately confirmed that Kessler utilized at least 17 different, fully realized aliases.
17.
And she didn't just stay in one place. She lived in 33 separate cities across 14 different states.
17 aliases. And she wasn't just introducing herself with these names at parties. She was deeply embedded in the bureaucratic system under these false identities. She successfully obtained fraudulent physical driver's licenses in Pennsylvania, Kansas, Tennessee, Virginia, and Florida.
Incredible.
The FBI even discovered she possessed a fake passport and multiple phony Social Security numbers. She had been operating under the fake Florida driver's license for Jennifer Seibert since at least 2003.
And didn't she actually get pulled over at one point?
Yes. In 2003, she was pulled over for a minor traffic violation in St. Johns County. She handed the officer that fake ID, and it completely passed inspection.
Which naturally brings us to the mechanics of this deception. How did she physically, administratively manage to accomplish this before the modern digital age, the era of biometric scanning and interconnected databases caught up with her?
I am so glad you brought this up.
The methodology of her identity theft is chilling because it's just so incredibly predatory.
I was reading through the sources on this, and it feels like a scene from a 90s psychological thriller. but it was her actual life.
Yeah.
To understand how she did this, you really have to transport yourself back to a time before everything was instantly searchable on a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
Kessler would physically visit local cemeteries. She would spend her afternoons walking through graveyards, carefully reading the headstones, looking for very specific profiles.
Right.
Then she would take those names and head to a public library or a county records office. She would scroll through microfiche, read old local obituaries, and utilize early genealogy portals to cross-reference the deaths.
And the most crucial element of this strategy was her target demographic. She didn't just steal random names. She deliberately and specifically sought out the identities of deceased teenagers or young children.
That is just so dark.
It is. The real Jennifer Seibert, for example, was a teenage girl from Kessler's own hometown of Butler County, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow. From
Yeah.
her hometown.
Yes. The real Jennifer tragically died in a car crash back in 1987. Kessler waited, went back to her hometown records, found a girl who died young, and basically resurrected her identity for her own use.
Okay, for someone listening who might wonder why a criminal would specifically target a dead teenager rather than a dead adult, can you break down the mechanical advantage of that? Why go through the trouble of finding a 1987 car crash victim?
So it's really an exercise in finding a pristine administrative environment. If you steal the identity of a living adult, or even an adult who recently passed away, you are inevitably going to cross paths with their existing administrative footprint.
Right, because they have a life on paper.
Exactly. They have a credit score, a mortgage, a tax history, a banking record, perhaps even a criminal background. The moment you apply for a loan or file a W-2 under their name, the system will swag the anomaly because two different lives are overlapping on paper.
The system notices the friction.
Precisely. But by targeting deceased youth, Kessler completely bypassed that friction. A teenager who died in 1987 has absolutely zero credit history. They have no adult criminal record. There are no active bank accounts or property taxes associated with their Social Security number. They are a bureaucratic blank slate.
So she finds this blank slate, this tragedy from 1987. How does she actually become that person in the eyes of the DMV? Like physically, how does that work?
Well, in the pre-9/11 era, the interconnectedness of state and federal databases was remarkably weak.
Right.
Kessler could find the name of the deceased teen, go to the Vital Statistics office, and simply request a duplicate copy of the birth certificate. Because the death records weren't always cross-referenced with birth records in real time back then, the office would just hand over the birth certificate.
Unbelievable.
She then takes that authentic birth certificate to the Social Security Administration to get a card, and then walks into a DMV with both documents to get a driver's license. She essentially created a perfect, hermetically sealed administrative bubble for herself.
It is exactly like a hermit crab.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, think about how a hermit crab survives in the ocean. It wanders the seafloor, soft and completely vulnerable to predators, until it finds an empty, pristine shell left behind by a sea snail that died. The crab doesn't build the shell, it just slides its body into this pre-existing, perfectly intact structure and moves in. And once it's inside, it is completely protected from the predators outside.
Yeah.
For Kessler, the predators were the police, the FBI, anyone from her past who might be looking for her. She just kept scouring the ocean floor, these cemeteries, finding new, empty shells to crawl into whenever the old one got too risky.
Yes, and the terrifying implication of that metaphor is that she was specifically hunting for the shells of dead children, because they were the most pristine and unquestioned camouflage available.
Just awful.
Her former boss in St. Johns County, a woman named Trina Knowles, actually testified about this. She said Kessler used odd names, changed her residential addresses constantly, wore numerous wigs to alter her physical appearance.
And didn't she have a cover story for all of that?
She did. She always claimed she was hiding from a dangerous stalker ex-boyfriend. That was her cover story for the secrecy. She was constantly shifting between shells, ensuring she never stayed in one place or one persona long enough to be truly examined by anyone.
She was a genius at the paper trail shell game. She could make her identity vanish with a few trips to the library. But, and this is where it all falls apart, Kessler's entire life was built on erasing paper.
Right.
The fatal flaw in her hermit crab strategy was that she was now dealing with biology, not bureaucracy. You can't just shred a crime scene like you shred an old bank statement. And that unforgiving biological reality hit her like a freight train when investigators started processing Tangle's hair salon.
The physical evidence left behind is what ultimately shattered her illusion of control. When forensics teams entered the hair salon, they found a scene that someone had desperately tried to sanitize.
Right, because she thought she could just clean it up.
Exactly. Kessler had used various chemicals, wiping down surfaces, trying to bleach away the event. But modern forensics, utilizing luminol and advanced biological screening, is incredibly unforgiving.
Yeah.
Despite her cleanup efforts, investigators found Joleen's blood spatter scattered throughout the environment. It was found on the receptionist's desk, which indicates the violence moved through the public area of the salon.
Wow.
It was found on Kessler's own professional cutting scissors. And most damningly, it was found on the clothing Kessler had been wearing.
And the search wasn't just contained to the salon either. Law enforcement executed a search warrant on a private storage unit that Kessler rented. Inside that unit, buried among her belongings, they found a specific pair of leather boots. These were the exact same boots that surrounding surveillance footage showed Kessler wearing on the day Joleen disappeared. When forensics tested those boots, they found drops of Joleen's dried blood on them.
But the piece of evidence that paints the most visceral picture of what happened in that salon was discovered in a simple blue bin.
Yeah, this detail is just haunting. Inside a blue bin in the salon, investigators found a partial fingernail belonging to Joleen.
In forensic pathology and crime scene reconstruction, a torn or broken fingernail is a highly significant indicator.
What does it tell them, exactly?
Well, it moves the investigative narrative entirely away from a theoretical accident, like a slip and fall or a clean, instantaneous event. A forcefully torn fingernail indicates a desperate, violent physical struggle.
Because she was fighting back.
It means the victim was fighting back, clawing at her surroundings or her attacker. Joleen Cummings fought for her life in that salon.
So the investigators have the blood spatter on the desk, they have the bloody scissors, they have the boots in the storage unit, and they have the torn fingernail indicating a struggle. What they do not have is Joleen.
Right. Nobody.
And they know, from pulling more surveillance video, that shortly after the disappearance, Kessler was seen physically struggling to heave large, heavy trash bags into a commercial dumpster located behind the hair salon.
Which forces law enforcement into one of the most grueling and psychologically taxing phases of any major investigation. The landfill search.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
By the time they identified the dumpster footage, the contents of that specific bin had already been collected by Waste Management and transferred to the massive Chesser Island landfill in Folkston, Georgia.
I really want to spend some time on this because when we hear landfill search on the news, it's easy to just picture people walking through a garbage dump looking around. But the logistical reality of what these teams did is almost beyond comprehension.
It's a massive undertaking.
Law enforcement initiated a Herculean effort to find Joleen's remains. We're talking about an operation that lasted for 7 consecutive days. They deployed between 35 and 50 highly trained personnel working grueling 12-hour shifts. This wasn't just local deputies. This included elite FBI evidence response teams flown in from field offices in Jacksonville, Atlanta, Boston, Washington, D.C., and the main laboratory in Quantico.
And to truly appreciate the dedication of these searchers, we have to emphasize the physical environment they were operating in. Over those 7 days, these teams sifted through 3,300 tons of garbage.
3,300 tons.
Yes. To put that into perspective for the listener, that is 6.6 million pounds of rotting, compacted municipal waste.
Oh my God.
And they're searching through it by hand, bag by bag, layer by layer.
And we haven't even mentioned the weather. This operation took place in July in the Deep South, on top of a mountain of decomposing garbage that basically generates its own heat. The sources note that the heat index on that landfill reached 117 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is dangerously hot.
It was a biologically dangerous environment. It was so hot that the search teams were required to wear specialized heavy ice vests just to survive their 12-hour shifts without collapsing. A dedicated hazard unit had to be stationed on-site solely to monitor the federal agents and deputies for heat stroke and toxic exposure.
They sifted through 6.6 million pounds of garbage in 117-degree heat, looking for any trace of a mother of 3.
Yeah.
And while the official reports indicate that they did find certain items of interest that corroborated Kessler's cleanup, likely discarded salon materials or specific cleaning supplies tied to the purchase history, Joleen's actual body was never recovered.
Which is just heartbreaking for the family. But from a purely mechanical standpoint, why is it so hard to find a body in a landfill if you know roughly which truck brought it in?
It comes down to the industrial intake process of a modern landfill. When a garbage truck arrives, it doesn't just gently drop bags onto a pile.
Right. It's not like taking out the trash at home.
Exactly. The waste is dumped and immediately subjected to massive industrial compactors machines that weigh over 100,000 pounds with spiked steel wheels.
Wow.
The trash is flattened, shredded, and then buried under layers of dirt and new garbage to control odor and pests. If biological remains are in those bags, they are subjected to catastrophic compression almost instantly upon arrival. Even knowing the grid and the truck, finding intact remains after that process is incredibly rare.
And that leads to a massive legal hurdle. If you are the prosecutor in this case, how do you even attempt to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury of 12 people that a murder occurred when a multi-agency, highly resourced FBI search of the exact disposal site yields absolutely no body?
It's a huge challenge.
I mean, the defense attorney's opening statement writes itself, right? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, where is the proof of death?
It is the defining challenge of a nobody homicide prosecution. Historically, the law relied heavily on the concept of corpus delicti, the body of the crime. Centuries ago, without a physical body, courts were terrified of executing someone for a murder, only for the victim to turn up alive years later.
Oh, that makes sense.
So to overcome this today, prosecutors must construct what is known as a dense circumstantial matrix.
Okay, for those of us who haven't been to law school, what exactly does a circumstantial matrix look like in practice?
It means you cannot rely on a single piece of evidence. You have to weave together hundreds of circumstantial threads so tightly that the only logical conclusion remaining in the room is murder.
Okay, so it's about the bigger picture.
Right. First, you have to definitively prove that the victim didn't just walk away voluntarily, hence the testimony about Mother's Day, the birthday, the devoted parenting. Second, you have to prove that the defendant took highly specific actions consistent with ending a human life and disposing of biological remains.
You have to prove the behavior of a killer, even if you don't have the result of the kill. And in Kessler's case, the way the state actually built that dense circumstantial matrix wasn't just relying on what she threw away in the dumpster, it relied heavily on what she typed into her iPhone.
Precisely. The biological evidence proved violence, but the digital evidence proved premeditation and intent. This is where Kessler's analog mastery completely and totally failed her.
Yes.
She understood microfiche and library archives, but she had a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of how the digital world operates.
Let's look at how she operated in the physical world leading up to the crime. First, the retail trail. Kessler was incredibly methodical in person. She went to various local stores and paid entirely in cash.
Again, utilizing her 90s playbook to avoid leaving a credit card paper trail.
Exactly. She bought ammonia, heavy-duty trash bags, thick cleaning gloves, and an electric carving knife.
Tools that, when purchased together in cash, are highly consistent with the dismemberment and chemical sanitization of biological remains.
Right. It paints a very grim picture. But there is a specific retail interaction from May 5th, which is a full 8 days before the murder, that really stands out. Kessler walks into a West Marine boating supply store in Fernandina Beach. She goes to the counter and buys heavy-duty industrial zip ties. And the clerk who sold them to her actually called the police days later when he saw her face on the news because he vividly remembered the interaction.
Really? What did he remember?
He told investigators that she stood at the counter with this bizarre, sheepish grin on her face while purchasing these massive restraints.
Investigators noted the specifications of those zip ties. They were not standard cable management ties. They were large enough and possessed the tensile strength required to restrain a struggling adult human being.
8 days in advance.
Exactly. Purchasing them over a week in advance is a massive red flag that clearly indicates a premeditated plan to incapacitate someone.
But the physical purchases pale in comparison to the digital smoking gun. It is absolutely fascinating to contrast her analog identity theft skills with her sheer digital recklessness.
She really didn't get it.
She honestly believed that if she just cleared her Safari browser, the thoughts in her head would remain secret. She had no idea that her digital footprint was permanently cached on servers hundreds of miles away.
Her Google search history provided investigators with a literal, time-stamped window into her pre-offense planning and post-offense psychological state.
Let's hear it.
Let's examine the premeditation first. On April 30th, which is nearly 2 full weeks before Joleen disappeared, Kessler opened her phone and Googled the exact phrase, "coworker guilty of killing coworker."
2 weeks before.
Yes.
She is literally searching for legal precedents regarding the exact relationship dynamic she shares with Joleen.
She didn't stop there. Over those weeks, she also actively searched for terms like autopsy, cadavers, murderpedia, victimpedia, and female murderers by country.
And then you look at the searches she conducted in the immediate aftermath of the disappearance. On May 16th, the very day she was arrested sleeping in her Kia Soul, she searched the phrase, "Joleen Cummings, no body, no crime."
Which is just wild.
Furthermore, forensics discovered that over the course of just 48 hours following the disappearance, she searched Joleen Cummings' name 457 times.
If we break down the psychology and legal weight of these searches, they are absolutely devastating to any defense strategy. First, the April 30th searches completely obliterate any potential claim that this was a spontaneous workplace argument or a tragic accident that got out of hand.
Yeah, you don't research that if it's an accident.
Exactly. You do not research the specific criminal liability of a coworker killing a coworker 14 days before you accidentally kill your coworker.
Oh.
It proves calculated, cold-blooded intent.
It shows she was workshopping the crime in her head for weeks. And what about the aftermath searches, the 457 searches for Joleen's name?
That intense volume of searches shows a suspect who is obsessively, almost compulsively monitoring her own investigation. She is desperately tracking the police's progress, trying to figure out what they know.
Right.
But the search for nobody, no crime is the most revealing piece of data in the entire case. It demonstrates that she was actively formulating a specific legal defense based on her arrogant belief that her method of disposal would immunize her from prosecution.
She really thought she had it all figured out.
She genuinely believed that if the landfill compactor did its job, she could beat the American justice system.
It is just pure, unadulterated hubris. She thought she was smarter than the forensic reality of the 21st century. But when the trial actually arrived and she realized that the digital evidence, the server logs she couldn't erase, was quartering her, her demeanor completely shifted.
Oh, absolutely.
The cold, calculating mastermind vanished, and the trial turned into an absolute chaotic circus.
To remain impartial and cover the entirety of the legal proceedings, we must examine the alternative theory presented by Kessler's defense team. They were facing a towering mountain of circumstantial and digital evidence, so they had to focus heavily on the one thing the state lacked: physical remains.
Right, the nobody defense.
Their primary argument to the jury was straightforward and foundational to criminal law. They argued, there is no body, there is no eyewitness, and therefore the state cannot conclusively, scientifically prove that Joleen is dead, let alone that she was intentionally murdered by Kimberly Kessler.
They also tried to muddy the waters regarding a potential motive. They suggested that if a physical confrontation did happen in the salon that night, it wasn't a premeditated assassination, but rather a spontaneous, explosive workplace conflict over drugs. To support this, they pointed to a piece of physical evidence found in Tangle's hair salon days after the disappearance, a small plastic baggie containing an unidentified chalky substance. The defense heavily highlighted that the state had left this baggie untested, suggesting it was proof of a drug dispute gone wrong.
Furthermore, they laid the groundwork for a self-defense claim. They presented photographs taken of Kessler during her intake after the arrest.
The ones showing her injuries.
Yes, these photos showed visible bruises, deep scratches, and scrapes across her arms, legs, and shoulders. The defense argued these injuries proved that a physical altercation occurred, but suggested that Joleen might have been the initial aggressor in a mutual combat situation.
I do have to point out the glaring contradiction regarding those injuries, though, because during Kessler's initial police interrogation, when detectives specifically pointed to the scratches and asked what happened, she didn't claim self-defense.
No, she didn't.
She didn't say Joleen attacked her. She literally looked at the detectives and said, "Guess what that's from? Bedbug bite, like a month ago."
Is that right?
She spun this elaborate lie, claiming she got bed bugs from staying at various homeless shelters and that the bugs had hitchhiked into her car and were eating her alive.
Which is a classic textbook example of an offender offering a bizarre, highly elaborate, and easily disprovable alternative explanation when confronted with physical evidence of a violent struggle.
Why do they do that?
It is another instance of cognitive overload. She couldn't quickly formulate a believable reason for having defensive wounds, so she defaulted to an absurd environmental excuse. But as the trial approached and the reality of her situation set in, Kessler's strategy shifted from offering bad excuses to total scorched earth disruption.
The courtroom disruption in this case was off the charts. Kessler completely derailed her own trial proceedings. She was eventually entirely removed from the physical courtroom by the judge because she would not stop shouting.
Hmm.
And the specific nature of what she was shouting was so bizarre she kept repeatedly, at the top of her lungs, yelling that her own court-appointed defense attorney, a man named Jordan Beard, was actually Joleen Cummings' cousin.
An incredibly specific claim that the court took seriously enough to thoroughly investigate, only to prove it was completely and totally false. But Kessler weaponized this fabricated conflict of interest to disrupt the proceedings, talking over the judge and forcing the court to have her watch her own murder trial via closed-circuit video feed from a separate, secure holding room.
And the chaos wasn't confined to the courthouse. Her behavior in the Nassau County Jail while awaiting trial was extreme. The sources detail the massive logistical and financial toll she took on the local jail system.
She really pushed the limits of the system.
She engaged in severe, prolonged hunger strikes. At one point, her body weight dropped between 74 and 89 pounds. It became a critical medical emergency. Sheriff Bill Leeper actually had to file an emergency petition with the court just to get legal permission to force-feed her so she wouldn't literally starve herself to death before she could face a jury.
And the behavioral extremes only escalated from there. She was Baker Acted by the authorities. For those outside of Florida, the Baker Act is a state law that allows for the involuntary institutionalization and examination of an individual who is deemed to be an immediate danger to themselves or others due to a mental health crisis.
Right.
She threw biological hazards, specifically her own feces, at the corrections officers guarding her cell. She made multiple unsuccessful suicide attempts.
It's just nonstop.
The Nassau County Sheriff's Office reported that the sheer manpower required to keep her alive and secure for trial, the 24/7 continuous suicide watch, the specialized medical care, the extra security details cost the local taxpayers over $215,000 before the trial even began.
I really want to pause here and ask for your professional read on this behavior. When you look at the timeline, the starvation, the feces throwing, the wild fabricated claims about her lawyer being related to the victim, how do you determine what is a genuine psychological break under the immense pressure of being caught versus what is a highly weaponized, calculated strategy to delay the trial and avoid justice?
It is one of the most difficult determinations forensic psychologists have to make, and it is often a complex mixture of both. However, given Kessler's extensive history, the behavioral evidence points heavily toward calculated obstruction.
Really? So you think it was an act?
Mostly, yes. We know she underwent 3 separate, rigorous mental competency evaluations. At one point early on, a judge did rule her temporarily incompetent to proceed and sent her to the Florida State Hospital for treatment. However, her competency was eventually restored, and multiple experts ultimately determined that she fully understood the nature of the charges against her and the mechanics of the legal system.
So underneath the chaos, she knew exactly what she was doing.
Yes, you have to look at her baseline personality. An offender who has successfully manipulated complex administrative systems, dodged federal agencies, and lived under 17 different identities for 22 years, knows exactly how to manipulate people and processes.
That makes a lot of sense.
The hunger strikes, the biohazard attacks, the courtroom outbursts. These are classic control tactics. When a highly controlling narcissistic individual is locked in a concrete cell, they suddenly have zero control over their environment. Refusing to eat, throwing feces, disrupting the judge. These are the absolute last remaining tools a hyper-controlling personality has left to exert dominance over the system that is trying to process them. It is defiance masquerading as madness.
She was trying to break the system from the inside out. But the system held its ground. Despite the lack of a body, despite the courtroom antics, the jury saw through it. They deliberated for just over an hour.
Wow.
An hour. That is an incredibly fast turnaround for a complex murder trial with no physical remains. They found her guilty of first-degree murder.
The reaction from local law enforcement following the verdict was visceral and highly public. Sheriff Leeper, who had dealt with her jailhouse behavior for years, was openly relieved.
I bet he was.
He stated to the press that they were literally celebrating her transfer to the state prison system with cake and ice cream. He was exhausted and eager to make her the state's problem.
And to impartially cover the post-conviction reality, we know that even from a state prison cell, Kessler hasn't stopped fighting the system. In July 2024, she filed a massive, sprawling appeal. She submitted 27 different grounds claiming she was framed. She pointed the finger at Joleen's ex-boyfriend. She blamed the salon owners for their lack of interior security cameras, and she rehashed her claims about her attorney. The appeals court, however, reviewed the filing and decisively denied it.
Which is entirely expected from a legal standpoint, given the overwhelming weight of the forensic evidence and the digital search history presented at the original trial.
So Kimberly Kessler is finally locked away for life. The ghost has a permanent address. But her conviction leaves this incredibly chilling, unresolved question hanging in the air. We are talking about a woman who successfully lived as an invisible phantom for over 2 decades. She knew how to stalk cemeteries, steal lives, and move without a trace. Is it truly possible that Joleen Cummings was her very first victim?
Sheriff Leeper was unequivocal about this exact question. He stated publicly, and I quote, "I don't believe for 1 second that Kimberly Kessler Tizissa. I don't believe this is her first murder. She's evil in the flesh."
That is a strong statement.
And when we look at her psychological profile and her operational history, she fits the exact behavioral parameters of what criminologists call a nomadic offender.
What exactly defines a nomadic offender in a context like this? We hear about serial killers who stick to a specific city, but how does a nomad operate?
A nomadic offender is someone whose primary methodology involves continuous, deliberate geographic mobility to avoid detection and constantly form new victim pools. They do not have a fixed anchor point or a home base.
Right.
By changing her name 17 times and moving across 33 cities in 14 different states, Kessler ensured that no single local police department could ever connect the dots of her behavior.
Because they wouldn't even know she was the same person.
Exactly. If she got into a violent conflict or if someone started asking too many questions, she simply abandoned that specific shell, crossed state lines, and moved to a new jurisdiction under a new dead child's name. It is a highly practiced methodology of evasion that inherently protects prior offenses. Her jurisdiction wasn't a city. Her jurisdiction was anonymity itself.
And when investigators started tearing apart her digital life, they found terrifying breadcrumbs that heavily support that theory. On her phone, buried alongside those Google searches for Joleen, forensics discovered a list of 60 different names. And mixed in with those names were disturbing, paranoid terms like Satanist, witch, and references to an evil, murderous gang.
This list was a massive red flag that prompted both local investigators and the FBI to initiate a look-back investigation into unresolved deaths or missing persons in the various geographic areas where Kessler was known to have lived.
What did they find?
One of those prominent names that jumped out from that list was a man named Kurt Christopher Allen.
Yes, the details surrounding this name are incredibly eerie. Kurt Christopher Allen died in Jacksonville, Florida, back in 2014. Now remember, investigators found personal journals written by Kessler in May of 2018, right around the exact time Joleen was murdered.
Right.
In those private journals, Kessler writes obsessively about an entity with the initials KCA. She describes KCA as a daemon in dreams, who is actively trying to recruit her into a satanic cult through a process she called astral projection.
When you synthesize those data points, the exact initials KCA, the documented death of a man named Kurt Christopher Allen in a city where Kessler was living at the time, and the extreme paranoid ideation present in her private journal entries, it elevates from a coincidence to a highly significant cold case breadcrumb.
And it wasn't just him. Investigators also looked into the death of a woman named Grace Darling Bartley, who died in 2009 up in Pennsylvania. She was married to a man named Tim Bartley.
Yeah, and Kessler had a connection to him.
Apparently, local lore suggested Kessler had briefly dated one of the Bartley brothers when she was much younger. Both Tim and his brother Wayne were also listed on that cryptic document of 60 names found on Kessler's phone.
Furthermore, the investigation into her past prompted a former high school classmate to contact authorities. This classmate urged police to look back even further to a fatal motorcycle crash that occurred in their hometown in 1987.
Yeah, this part is crazy.
This specific crash killed a friend of the classmate and seriously injured Kessler's own brother, Bob.
I remember reading this and thinking, why would anyone suspect a teenage girl of causing a fatal motorcycle crash involving her own brother?
Because of her documented history of extreme, unpredictable familial violence. Kessler had a known history of viciously attacking her own family members, including a terrifying incident where she allegedly attempted to assault her brother Bob with a baseball bat.
Oh, wow.
The classmate noted to investigators that there were persistent rumors in the community at the time that the motorcycle hadn't just crashed, but had been intentionally forced off the road.
And the stories of her past violence from people who actually knew her just keep piling up. Investigators tracked down and interviewed her ex-boyfriend from the 1990s, a man named Tim Barnes. He told detectives that dating Kessler was a terrifying experience.
Mm.
He claimed on the record that she stabbed him in the chest during an altercation, that she physically bit his father's leg, and that she killed his pet cat with a shotgun.
When you synthesize all of these disparate breadcrumbs, the paranoid journal entries, the cryptic letter of 60 names, the documented history of stabbing, animal cruelty, and familial assaults, you see a clear, undeniable pattern of severe escalating violence over decades.
It's a terrifying pattern.
But here is the tragic reality.
Mhm.
Tracing the actual prosecutable crimes of a phantom is an investigator's absolute worst nightmare.
Yeah.
How do you definitively, legally link a cold case from Pennsylvania in 2009 to a woman sitting in a Florida jail in 2018 who has changed her legal identity 17 times? The administrative trail isn't just cold. It was intentionally broken and scattered by design.
It's like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. She built her entire existence around being fundamentally untraceable.
Exactly. And that is the fascinating overarching juxtaposition of this entire case. Kimberly Kessler was an absolute, undeniable mastermind at the analog administrative game of hiding. She knew how to exploit the paper-based, compartmentalized bureaucratic systems of the 20th century with terrifying perfection.
But she was entirely undone by the invisible realities of the 21st century. She couldn't bleach away the microscopic DNA of the woman she killed, and she couldn't erase the digital footprint time-stamped on Google's servers.
Right.
The very technology she used to obsessively monitor the police is exactly what the police used to put her in prison for the rest of her life.
It serves as a profound testament to how the landscape of criminal investigation has fundamentally shifted over the last 2 decades. You can no longer just disappear into a local cemetery, find a headstone, and steal a name to start over. The biological and digital markers we leave behind in the modern world are permanent, inescapable tethers.
Which brings us right back to where we started and leaves me with this thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. We live in a society where we are constantly warned about identity theft. We are told to shred our mail, to use complex passwords, to monitor our credit.
Yeah, the usual cybersecurity stuff.
Right. We worry about faceless hackers sitting in a basement halfway across the world, stealing our credit card numbers or draining our bank accounts for quick financial gain. We think of identity theft purely as a cybercrime, a crime of greed.
But the case of Kimberly Kessler reframes that fear entirely.
It really does. Because what happens when the systems designed to document our lives and to mourn our deaths become the very camouflage used by a violent predator? Kimberly Kessler didn't steal names to get rich or buy flat-screen TVs. She stole the names of dead children so she could live right next door to you, cutting hair in a local salon, hiding in plain sight while harboring immense violence.
That's a chilling thought.
Think about how many times you've handed over your driver's license this year to a bank teller, a police officer, or an employer without anyone second-guessing it. We put so much blind faith in a piece of plastic. If a woman can live as an absolute untraceable ghost for 22 years simply by walking through a cemetery and filling out a few forms, it really makes you wonder. How much of our society, how much of our safety still relies on the incredibly fragile honor system of a name,